Validity refers to the accuracy or correctness of a given construct or a given measure or a given variable. A construct can also be a variable or a measure. Examples of construct includes income. Income can accurately or quite accurately or somewhat correctly measures a person's socio-economic status. This is what we mean by validity. And another example of a construct or would be health, even though it is a multi-dimensional concept. There are different dimensions of health. We have physical health, we have mental health, we have cognitive functioning, we have all the clinically diagnosed measures, we have visual performances. All these are valid measures of health, and sometimes the scores we get from all these different measures can be combined into an index to measure a person's health. So, health is a valid measure of a person's medical well-being. And visual performance. Sometimes we don't have access to clinical data because they are confidential. And sometimes certain organizations, they want to protect the respondents' privacy. So they don't easily release clinical measures of visual performance to researchers. And when this happens, sometimes researchers have to resort to self-report visual performance. And with regards to that, researchers will ask respondents to rate their own visual functioning from poor to maybe fair to very good and to excellent. And oftentimes research have confirmed that self-report visual functioning is a valid measure of health. It measures one aspect of health. And respondents are also sometimes required to answer certain questions to assess their cognitive performance, maybe to read a number in reverse manner or to read a certain alphabet in reverse manner. And cognitive functioning is also a valid measure of health. Cognitive performance, even if respondents have to take certain tests in the lab, accurately and correctly measures a person's health. And there are two major kinds of validity. The first one is internal validity. So internal validity is attained when the way we select our participants, and if they all or most of them agree to be in our study, aligns with the purposes of our study. If that's the case, if we ask a bunch of prospective respondents and most of them, like 80-90%, agreed to be part of the study, then there's a chance that we may attain internal validity in our findings. And internal validity can also be attained when we can assess that changes in one or more independent variables actually led to changes in our dependent variable. And internal validity is also attained when we have a way to collect data on all our potential independent variables and also our dependent variables. So there are very few missing cases in the sample we collect. And because of that, there's a good chance that we may attain internal validity. And internal validity can also be attained when we use random sampling. So, we often say that internal validity can be attained when our findings are valid due to each of these criteria. All these criteria may not have to happen concurrently. And sometimes internal validity can also be compromised. Internal validity can be compromised when it's not possible to conduct a random sample from our target population. And because of that, we have to resort to non-probability sampling when that happens. And when we resort to non-probability sampling, some kind of self-selection may occur. Respondents may agree to participate in our study because they see some benefit in one way or another. For instance, respondents with certain health conditions may be more inclined to participate in a clinical trial for a new drug, or to participate in a study related to a new testing procedure, a new screening procedure. When that happens, self-selection is involved. And because of that, this may compromise the internal validity of our study. And previous victims of school shootings may be more inclined to participate in studies on ways to prevent future shootings. Or sometimes it can also be the reverse. They don't want to be traumatized by their past experiences and they may decline participation. When that happens, the sample we collect may only include people who have not experienced a shooting event. So when this happens, internal validity can be compromised in our study. And internal validity can also be compromised when participants already know ahead of time the protocols researchers are going to use, the steps involved, or the procedures involved. So maybe they already prepared themselves ahead of time. And because of that, we cannot accurately measure the effects of the intervention on the outcomes. And internal validity can also be compromised when researchers change the instruments, the equipments, or the devices they use in their study. This can either be a gradual or impromptu change, and either one of them can lead to the internal validity of their findings being compromised. Internal validity can also be compromised when we only have one group of participants, and this one group of people, they either experience the event or the intervention or not. And because of that, we cannot assess whether that event led to some changes in our intended outcomes or not, because we don't have a comparison group. We are either missing a testing or control group, or a treatment or a control group. For instance, if the school wants to implement a gated community to prevent shootings. And maybe students who personally experience a shooting event may be more inclined to participate in the survey. Or things can be reversed. Those who experience a shooting event may be less inclined to participate in this pilot study. And because of that, if our sample includes mostly or all students who either experience a shooting, or our sample includes mainly or all respondents who have not experienced a shooting, it can be one way or another. Depends on how students feel. Then we may be lacking a comparison group when this happens. One group of students may be a lot more than the other group of students. When this happens, it's very hard for us to make comparisons, and this may compromise our internal validity if we actually want to make comparisons. And internal validity can also be compromised if the steps involved in the research, the protocols, the procedures, or even the measurement used are not properly adhered. And internal validity can also be compromised if we make certain changes that are not relevant or not related to the purposes of our study. External validity talks more about the generalizability of our findings. External validity is attained if our findings are valid for those who actually participated in our study. Based on all these criteria met, consistency in the instruments used, the devices used, the testing mechanisms, or we use the appropriate instruments, devices, testing mechanisms on these participants. External validity is also manifested when the procedures and protocols are adhered throughout the study or experiment. External validity are also manifested when we have the right measurement using the appropriate constructs or variables. We measure things the right way. And external validity also has to be manifested in those not involved in our study, but their demographic and socio-economic criteria of these respondents or these individuals who were not selected, but their characteristics match those who were selected in our study, even though these criteria were not met. So, to attain external validity, these two conditions have to be met. The results have to be valid for those who actually participated in our study, given these criteria being met. And the results also have to be valid for those who are not being selected into our sample. And these criteria are not met.